Property development, it's a big one. Everyone wants to get into it. Everyone wants to make $100,000 in a deal. I just recently did a property development deal. I made over $100,000 in the deal itself, which is awesome, right? It feels good. It's amazing. But when should you not be a property developer? When should you not be considering developing? And what are some of the things that we should be looking out to know, you know what, we're at that point now. We should be a property developer. We should be considering it and thinking about it. This session today is all about property development. We've got on a special guest, Jeremy Inizelli, who is a co-host of this session. He is an accountant, absolute legend in the industry. And then we also have Versteegh, who is a property developer. The whole session is about him and property development, and we dive deep into what we should be doing, how we should be thinking about it, the pros, the cons, the special trip-ups that beginner investors mess up on, and we go through all of it. So if you're someone that's interested about property investing and then thinking about property development in the future, you're going to love this session. It's going to be exactly for you. Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest, it is property investment community with over 76,000 people. That's a lot of folks that are interested about property investing. They're just like you, and they're looking to learn about property investing, property development, deals, money. How do we succeed? How do we push our lives forward? And each week we interview top property experts so that we can all learn and grow together. And this session is with Ross. He dives deep into the development space. So why am I even talking? Let's just jump into it. Let's go. Let's do it. Okay, well, I'm a first-time developer now. I want to get started. Like, what is a good starting point? What is a good entry in? What is a good gateway drug into this property development world?
Yeah, I mean, look,
I want to do 10. I want to do like a 1 into 10.
Yeah, it's probably, definitely starting small is the ideal. You know, you make small money, but you also have a chance of only losing small money realistically. You know, you go start buying like 1 into 10s. Firstly, you know, good on you for having such a great job to be able to service it. But, you know, you're probably looking at other people's money as well. You know, you're not going to be able to just get finance for a 1 into 10 straight away, most likely, you know. So you want to start small. You want to start within your budget, you know, something that you can actually finance yourself using, you know, generally some of the bigger lenders, you know, because they've probably got more favorable interest rates. You start going like lower tier lenders, you're starting to pay 8-9% interest. You know, if you're going to get other people's money, it's going to be sort of around the 11-12% interest potentially, where if you can just sort of stick with a 1 into 2 or 3, you'd be sitting at just like a regular interest rate, because you can probably buy it as an investment property, you know, so it's just a regular investment loan. Could even be interest only, you know, which mitigates some of your holding costs.
And is there a number? I think people like to relate to a number, Ross, is talk about value-wise.
Because you're an accountant, Jeremy.
I'm sorry. Numbers tell the best story for me. But is there like as Joe said, he's a brand new developer. He wants to go 1 into 10. You've told him, no, you're getting a big whack. And you said, look, hey, you need to probably focus on a certain value. For anyone out there who wants to do their first one, what would be typically, say, a profit margin, a profit amount that you're after in terms of overall gross value? So we talk about gross value, we're talking about the overall value of the project as a sale price. What could you give people as a starting point? Hey, this is probably the band that you need to look at.
Yeah, I typically look at any project that's like anywhere above 10% total return on investment. Usually I like to kind of work around the 50% of my cash being returned. So if once I do all my numbers and I realize I need to put in 200 grand cash, I want that deal to be making me 100 grand cash after everything. So then that way, you know, I'm now going to go into the next deal with not 200 grand cash, but 300, you know, depending when the ATO decides to want to get their share. So
someone's jumped in the comments. I want to make a 12% kind of profit.
And that's interesting. You said 10, right? Because you look at a lot of the, you know, everyone's developing 20%. It's a lot of development seminars, and I see it. I've been involved in it. They're pushing through, guys. If it's not between 18 and 20, don't waste your time. So it's interesting that you said 10%, because sometimes taking that little bit of cream off the top is not bad. No one ever went broke making money, not that I know of, anyways.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
capital starting point, I get it asked all the time, Jeremy, how much cash should I have to even start developing? You know, can I do it with no money, or do I need $1 million in the bank? What would you say a good typical cash starting point is based on a value of a property, for argument's sake?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, generally speaking, you want to probably go buy something, you know, with 80% LVR, just so you're avoiding LMI. But I mean, if you're really tight on cash, I mean, get as high a LMI as possible, you know, and then, get as high as LVR as possible and just pay the LMI. And that's going to reduce your cash input. I did that probably with my first 3 properties, you know, where instead of saying, you know, back in the day, obviously the properties were about 300 grand, which means you need 60,000 as a deposit for your 20 plus 5% for closing. So you're up around, 75,000, something like that. Instead, I did 97% loans. So I needed all of, 20 grand, and I'm into the property, pay 8 grand in LMI. So I'm less than 30. What do I do with the other 30 grand? Well, guess what? That's the division money, So that's where, once I got that first property out and then I got the returns on that, I went into the very first one, obviously using a bit of the, The
first home guarantee.
First homeowners grant. Yeah. First homeowners grant, and then saved up all my money and spent it basically, between Johnny Red and the development, basically, finishing off the development. But then once the development finished, I had enough cash to literally go buy another house with huge LVR and then spend the rest of it as the development. So, I guess now houses aren't worth 300 anymore. They're worth, up around between 600 and 800. It's really just a similar calculation effectively, so probably anywhere around like the 100 to 150 grand, is probably a good starting point.
So if you're buying, say for argument's sake, most development properties now, that's arguably say 800 grand.
Yeah.
What would you say a very comfortable amount of pool of cash is required to get that $800,000 property now in a 1-to-2 where the numbers make sense?
Yeah, comfortably. If you want a property like that, I would be saying, look, if you got 350,000 access to, you might not use all of it, but at least it means if something happens, you need to throw some money in, you're not going to be waiting. Last thing you want is a development hung because you're trying to work out how to get that last 30K.
So give or take, if we take those numbers as a percentage, probably the high 30s, early 40% of the initial property's purchase price, would you say that's a comfortable metric?
Yeah, about 30% to 40% of that property's value, the purchase.
So go in with as little deposit required and have this big chunk of cash ready to kind of get you out of any mischief or push things forward at a quicker rate. Is that what you're saying, Ross?
Yeah, correct. Keep it moving. You don't want to have your costs blow out and eat up your profit just because of interest.
Most people out there developing for the first time, they might have a full-time job, 40, 50 hours a week, or they might be running a small business where they just don't have the bandwidth. What type of time is involved typically in a lot of your developments? And let's even go back to when you're doing smaller ones. What's the time involvement people need to allocate for this? Yeah,
I would say probably the first developments that I did, it was pretty time intensive. I was doing a lot of the renovation work myself. I was going into council, so early the council wouldn't even accept a PDF. You had to print off your plans and give it to them in paper. So there was quite a lot of time. I reckon probably around, if I was to weigh it up, maybe 4 weeks. So what's that? 160 hours worth of work, maybe 200 hours worth of work for a development to go through. And a lot of that's obviously learning and research. I suppose that doesn't really count some of the research that goes into it, but, add all that sort of stuff in. Now, we obviously have a lot better systems in place, a lot more knowledge and experience, and network. Network makes a big difference. I'm not like going, what the heck is an arborist? I've got 4 arborists that I can talk to, so, and most of them will come out straight away. But yeah, I reckon probably typical development, sort of your 1-to-3s or 4s, 2s, whatever, everything that's a bit basic, maybe 40 hours, 50 hours worth of like work combined. A lot of it's just emails and phone calls, liaising with
Is there a person that people can lean on? Let's say you're Joe again, you've just picked up your first development site, you're very green in the space. Who would you recommend the first person that you really need to speak to kind of get the ball rolling? Because that's probably one of the biggest things I see, Joe, is that people just don't know where to go. They think they've got to maybe try to speak to, first people try to go to an accountant or they might go to their mortgage broker, but they're not probably the first place. Who would you go to, Ross? Or where would you recommend someone should go to kind of get things moving?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the ideal would be to talk to a developer if you could find one, and just sort of ask them how they start, or would they recommend everything, what they would recommend, and how they start, because it's a pretty in-depth field. What's that?
So, well, it's such a great point. Like, it's amazing what picking up the phone does. Like, there are so many people, there's so many town planners, there's so many building designers, there's so many developers out there that are willing to give you so much value. Like, I call you and chat to you, Ross, all the time. Not recommending everyone call Ross and annoy him with silly questions. But there are so many people out there that if you just pick up the phone and ask questions and are excited about it and know, you know, asking ask better questions, get better answers. It's amazing what people will kind of give you. The people will give you time. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone, but also ask silly questions, but also think about the question before you ask it.
Yeah. Even asking agents, you know, when I was doing my developments, I was asking obviously a lot of agents and go to different opens. You know, I'd go to opens of houses that are similar to what I'm doing up the street or in the same suburb. And I'd be like, oh, you know, is this a new development? You know, is it been on the market long? Do you know how long the developer took to do it? Sometimes the agent will just tell me to piss off, like, you know, you're not obviously interested. Sometimes they would think that I'm interested and they just wanted to help. You know, they'll be happy to give some of that information. Sometimes you make connections from that. So, you know, that's something. Just ask lots of questions, ask lots of people. You know, eventually you'll find someone that knows something.
Yeah.
I'll give a big recommendation to any quantity surveyor out there. If you're going through your first development, it's not a bad thing to, you know, pay a QS to do a report of what it would cost. So that way, you know, you're not A, getting ripped off, or B, underquoted for that sneaky little thing a lot of builders do, which is variations.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
and that's one of the main things I see. I know you asked earlier, Joe, where do people break in property development? It's actually variations. That's the biggest thing. Because
so what's the variation? What's the variation?
A change in the contract. So you know, a variation could be as simple as, you know, you put your slab down and there was more cubic meters of concrete needed than what they thought, and so they'll just hit you up for it. You know.
Well, that's like our development. That's like our development, Ross. We had, what did we do? We did retaining, and we said that we're going to do the retaining, and then what happened with that situation?
Yeah.
Is that a variation of the contract, or maybe not?
Yeah, well, in a way, yeah. The person who bought our block, you know, they signed a contract with a larger builder, and then the builder didn't use our bench levels, and so by not using our bench levels, it then incurred more costs to the person buying it. You know, but they'd already signed the contract. You know, they've already paid their deposit, which then goes and pays for engineering and everything else like that. So, you know, that's now a variation, which now he's got to cough up or pull out. And if he pulls out, he's going to lose that deposit. So, you know, but even if he goes through with that build, right, and then finishes it, and then, you know, maybe the pavers go up in the meantime. If depending on that contract and how it's worded, he might be up for additional money paying for the outdoor paving, for instance, you know. So some builders have a full fixed price contract. Some are fixed price, but they'll probably hit you with variations afterwards anyway. So that's the dangerous thing, because it's outside the scope of finance. So sometimes a lot of these variations they've got to come from person's back pocket. And that's where I do see a lot of people, you know, that they get broken. And a good example, Ross, I share about a client. He bought a block of land, an old property, very old property, and it had this friable asbestos. So for anyone out there to understand the difference of asbestos types, there's bonded, which is nice big clumps you can pick up and remove. And then there's friable asbestos, which is actually kind of like crumbled and scattered into the ground. And he bought the property, got a building report being done just to make sure that things were quite good, because it was going to keep the front house. Lo and behold, the little old wog man for many, many years was digging holes and dumping his asbestos sheets from the shed in the ground. And once the builder started to excavate, he saw this asbestos. And in this particular case, about 100 mil worth of dirt needed to be scraped off the property, then filtered, and then disposed of. And that cost my particular client hundreds of thousands of dollars
to the point where the property the entity had to go into liquidation because you couldn't fund these variations. So that's where that pot of cash might come into play, or you just need to make sure that.
How do we stop that one?
I literally have a project that I'm doing that's exactly the same as that, and down to the old Italian dude that owned it. And but we walked it, and maybe it's obviously because I got a bit of building experience and everything. But we realized that this isn't all just green acre land. There's definitely some building debris here, and so and being a larger lot, we thought it's going to be wise in our due diligence period that we spend some money and we go get an environmental report. Not just for the stormwater or other bits and pieces. Yeah. So we spent, it was like 18 grand. It's a huge block, but we spent that money because realistically, if there's asbestos, exactly like you say, the deal could just die. And I'd much rather throw 15 grand in the bin, knowing that I walked away from potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's only if it was asbestos. If it was, even worse, let's say, for some reason, there was a mechanical workshop on there that now is gone, and there was some actual ground contamination deep in the soil. You might not be able to excavate it at all. And if you're looking at doing a residential, you can't have a certain level of soil contamination because people could plant vegetable gardens and fruit trees and have their kids play on the grass, etc. So that 100 mil of asbestos getting scraped, that would be pretty annoying because it has like a pretty tangible cost to it. But if you've got to excavate, some of it just can't be excavated at all. You just go, that's just dead ground. It's not suitable for purpose that you want. You might be able to put some more workshops on there, or wait another 50 years for it to decontaminate, like sink lower.
What are some of the 3 aha moments, the things that newbies should always think about and remember? So let's go through some of the checklists of due diligence and newbie things that we need to kind of check off. Are there any kind of clear ahas for you? And then what are some of the checks that we need to be thinking about as a new developer?
The 3 ahas, like the stuff that I've learned.
Well, maybe we don't need ahas, but maybe the top 10 development things to consider?
Yeah, site area. Probably that's the most important thing. Making sure you've got a large enough site for a development. Yeah. No point looking at 500 square meter allotments if the minimum land size is 300. You literally can't even do a 1:2. So the larger the site, the better. And then within that is frontage. Presuming just a straight 1:, whatever, you're demoing the house. You're going to need decent frontage. Houses that firstly are street facing sell better than hammerheads. Most people would know that, I would imagine.
So what's a hammerhead?
So like a battle axe. So you have like a bigger house out the back and then a driveway down the side of the existing house. Frontage, if you've got, say, a 10 meter wide block, you can fit a reasonable size house on that frontage. But if you've got 12 meters, you're much more likely to fit a double garage. Again, garaging, depending on the areas, might sell for more. So, these are things to think about. Corner blocks, sometimes they're elongated like long ways as they go around. That block there will be more valuable than, say, this one next door because you've got opportunity to chop 3 houses up whilst maintaining a reasonable frontage, as opposed to this block, which might be the exact same size land, but can actually only do 2 because you might only end up with 2 8-meter wide blocks. So, you can only get 2 houses on there, even though they're the same size block of land. So that would be probably the first thing that I would look at is how big is the land. Second thing I'd look at is the council regulations. Here in Adelaide, we've got an awesome site called SAPA, which tells you the council regulations and overlays everything. Very, very easy to, well, not very easy to use, but reasonably easy to use, but really quick once you get a hang of it. And then that then can let you know, basically, if you found that block of land that is of a larger size, are you in a correct zone that would allow you to do the development, So is it going to be a 1:2 or is it a 3, et cetera, et cetera?
And then, okay, let's just say I've got minimum site clearance. I've got 700 square meter block and it's 18 meter frontage. I can develop it now. I can just, boom, it's okay. Yeah,
potentially. The next things you then would want to look at, especially if you've got, Google Maps or SAPA has a satellite image, does it have any trees, large canopy trees in the block, adjacent the block? We've thrown deals away because neighbors had a tree. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Not adjacent. You got to have
And Jason's there.
And Jason, yeah. So if a neighbour's got a giant gum tree, potentially that could ruin your footprint of your house, and you can't do anything about the neighbour's tree, effectively, So you want
a neighbour's tree because of the roots that come from the other. Yeah, so that's a big thing. Not many people I personally aren't looking. I've never looked at what the neighbour's trees look like. I look at the block. Yeah, no trees. Perfect. So that's a big thing, right? What's the neighbour actually done that could impact the property that you're purchasing?
Yeah, correct. And some of these trees, these larger gum trees, they can have a tree protection zone or a TPZ of up to 15 meters radius, which, like Joe just mentioned, you got an 18 meter wide block. Let's say the neighbor's trees on the boundary or, on their fence, 14 of your 18 meters now can't be built in. So probably a dead site, I say probably because it depends on the type of tree, but this is where you have arborists. Yeah. Well, these are just quick things that you look at,
So what are the tree type of just any tree, or is it there specific trees
new guidelines have come in Adelaide at the moment, which are pretty shit actually. So anything over a meter, so basically anything that's like this round or more is now like regulated, and they added a bunch of extra trees.
Every tree, not just native.
No, luckily, a good arborist, they might find that the tree's been improperly maintained over its lifespan and that has a hazard of falling on the house, and therefore recommend it should be removed. That's a really good argument to be able to not have a tree on your block. Again, neighbours is the one that kills it the most though, because if it's got a neighbouring tree, unless your neighbour's happy to get rid of the tree, you can't do anything. You just can't. You can get rid of the trees on your block most of the time, but you can't get rid of neighbours' trees.
Any other things like trees, land size, frontages, what else?
And then you've got probably something, that people maybe don't look at as much, and it's contour, because unless you know the area, you're very familiar with it. It could have a little bit more slope than what you anticipate, and even just a meter or 2 meters fall from one side to another over a large block of land, like 1,000 squares or 2,000 squares, can still add up in retaining costs by the time you end up doing it, a division, and building out. So either you got to get either way you're paying for it, whether you pay for it and sell the blocks of land, or whether your builder has to allow for that retaining to be done, you're gonna cough it up.
I mean, the flood zone might be impacted by flood, but is there a 5 meter, a 2 meter, like when you look at it, you're like, oh, dude, that's a 7 meter. Don't even worry, or like, is there a number that you think about?
It depends on how many houses you're building as well, because you can accommodate some of the slope in the builds. And it depends on where it is. Say like the one that we had in Ranella, Joe, that had a reasonable slope to it, 3 meters, I reckon, but it was left to right. So we could accommodate 1 meter on one side, 1 meter between the dwellings, 1 meter between the other dwellings, and then I think that's all the meters done. Whatever it was to an amount where it seemed like a lot on paper, but actually it wasn't that bad overall, And in fact, the neighbor had dealt with it relatively okay. That doesn't mean that there's going to be no cost. It just means that, it's not going to be too terrible. So yeah, because as a retaining wall goes up, like you said, Joe, like 2 meter retaining walls, they're pretty hefty, and they go down a long way too. So you're going to bring bigger machinery, bigger metal, all that sort of stuff. Or if you can keep it to sort of tiered, follow the land. Don't fight against it. Just follow it.
Great point.
Street furniture, and that can be things. So street furniture, weird word, but like basically means like, where's your side entry pits? Where does your stormwater go from the gutter? Where are like local power poles? Are there any street trees? Because council obviously don't want you to get rid of your own trees. They certainly don't want you to get rid of their trees. Are there bus stops, traffic lights? Are you on a roundabout? You're like Great Corner Block, and then you look and it's a roundabout, and you definitely aren't getting a driveway at the exit of a roundabout. So little things like that, have a quick look on Google Street View and see what's there that could affect the potential new builds. Effectively, you're going to be putting 3 or 4 houses on there. That's 3 or 4 driveways. Can they even drive in there?